Hey everyone, welcome to TechStrong TV. I'm Alan Schimmel, your host. Thanks for joining us. Today is July 23rd, and we are thrilled to have you on here. Getting near the end of the week, and it's been a bit of a crazy week. You know, things are not slowing down this summer. I don't know if it's related to what's going on with COVID, or the economy in general and the world in general, or maybe it's just me. But I just feel like we haven't taken a summer break. We haven't slowed down, and I'm concerned about maintaining this pace permanently. Maybe this is the new normal. Anyway, we've got a great show lined up today. Let me tell you a little bit who we've got. My friend Deepak, CTO at Puppet. I'm going to take a shot at, I always call him Deepak, but it's Grindahaka Popal, and I messed that up terribly. You should call him Deepak too. But anyway, Deepak is going to be on joining us. I haven't had a chance to talk to him for almost a year. He's going to talk to us about a new update to Puppet infrastructure automation portfolio. Makes it easier to automate your applications and so forth. So good stuff there. And it was actually just an all-around good catch-up session with Deepak. So please check that one out. After that, I'm going to be back with my friend Liz Zalman, CEO at Strong DM. And Liz has some friends with her from Mantle, a fintech company. And they're going to talk about how, solutions such as Strong DM that allow for, rapid onboarding of employees and users and so forth are really helping them deliver a state-of-the-art banking solution to small and medium-sized community banks, credit unions, stuff like that. Then I'm really happy. I have a interview with both Mitchell Ashley and Sanjeev Sharma of Accelerated Strategies Group, and between the three of us, we kind of started the business there. And they just dropped a new report on the state of software delivery management. It's a great report. It's getting some great reviews and buzz, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And that's with Mitch and Sanjeev Sharma. Then I'll be back after that to introduce a little something old for today, coming at us again from TechStrong Con, and that is with Paul Stack of Pulumi. And he's going to demonstrate why infrastructure in general programming language is a better choice. If you're not familiar with Pulumi, they're a small company, doesn't get a lot of press, but their technology and their whole approach to how to do things. A lot of people that I really respect in the tech space respect what Pulumi's doing. So check out Paul's presentation there. Then I'll be back with the news of what's going on around town at the media ops sites. And then we'll turn things over as usual to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene's interview today is with Fleming Shai, CTO Barracuda Networks. She'll also give us a good webinar preview of what we have in store for the end of this week, beginning of next week on the Media Ops webinars. And we then have Mitch Ashley at the Analyst Corner. So Mitchell's doing a double. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. It's a great Thursday. We're going to take a quick commercial break right here and be right back. Our first guest today in today's show is my friend Deepak Girihara Gopal. It's like three names put together there. It's hard for me to pronounce. It's probably hard for you to pronounce. But my friend Deepak, as I call him, is the CTO at Puppet. He also runs a lot of their product strategy. And he's been at Puppet, I think, it's like 9 years now. So he's really seen Puppet mature and evolve and develop over this time. I think you'll enjoy his my interview with Deepak. He's going to tell us what's going on with the latest Puppet updates and where we go from there. So here's my interview with Deepak Girihara Gopal.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this segment for TechStrong TV. My guest is I actually haven't had the chance to talk to Deepak, and I'm going to say 2 years, maybe more. But it's Deepak Gary Dar Agopal.
That's pretty good. Giri Dara Gopal. It's like three names smashed together. Yeah.
It's okay.
There
We're
it
going to
is.
call you Deepak for the rest of this interview, but I want the
fine.
people to understand what your real name was. It's important.
Sure enough.
Your parents gave you a name. You have
That's
your family
true.
name, and they deserve to hear it said.
There you go.
Deepak, well, I'm going to let you introduce your position and stuff with Puppet, if it's okay.
Sure. Yeah. I'm CTO and chief architect at Puppet. I've been with Puppet for a pretty long time, maybe about 9 years, something like that. So I've kind of been through a lot of the changes, I guess, that have happened both in the industry and kind of IT in general. And early on I did everything from, I wrote a lot of code on Puppet itself and helped build the commercial products, and all the way to now, managing a portfolio and longer term product strategy, and doing great interviews with you. So.
Very cool. And you're right. It's been a long, strange trip, right? I mean, at the macro level, think about when Puppet first came out. Was it about 12 years Puppet's here around now?
Yeah, it was an open source project exclusively, I think, for several years with our founder, Luke, running sort of a one-person consultancy. And then, around 2010, 2011 is when we finally started doing commercial product, actually made it a company, started hiring more people, and, took off like a like a rocket ship, and that takes us to today.
But, we also... I mean, the world was different then, right? The idea of being able to, with the advent of cloud, being able to spin up instances in an automated manner, and every single one was exactly like a clone of the next, or was done to the exact configuration you wanted. And if you want to put changes in, you could put those changes in across, right?
Yep.
Which was kind of Puppet's original, one of the original kind of missions, was revolutionary. It was a game changer for people to just, hey man, I'm going to spin up 50 instances. You're talking to someone who used to be in the data center management business.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea of spinning up 50 servers, that was a lot of screwdrivers and wires. Right?
It's a good point you bring up. I think definitely I think the starkest contrast for me was that early on, back then, I would find myself on the road talking with, potential customers or talking with people in the community. And there was still a huge amount of my time that was spent convincing people that automation, you should probably do it. Like, it's a good thing. And there was...
You might want to consider it.
You might want to consider it, which in 2020 sounds outlandish, right? If you go in the Wayback Machine and think about it, though. That was something that not everybody was doing. Not everybody even understood it, and many folks found it honestly kind of threatening. It sort of shattered their conception of what it meant to be working in IT. So the good news is, I think, fast forward to 2020, I find myself very rarely trying to convince someone that automation is a good thing. But I think with all the tech improvements that have happened, in a weird way, one thing I always think about is now it's so easy, because I hear this from a lot of cloud providers. Well, it's so easy, you could just spin up like 1,000 VMs, in a minute with your credit card. And I think about, I'm like, wow, that is pretty easy. But the very next problem is, well, now I have 1,001 problems, which is I just spun up 1,000 things. It's not like they don't manage themselves, right? So I think I've been working really hard in my career to try and come up with a law I could vainly name after myself. So the closest one I could think of for Deepak's law would be in IT, complexity is never it's never destroyed. It only moves around. So I think
the job's never finished, and it really, it's almost like Out of the Goal. Right, the book, of course, that Phoenix Project's based on, which is as soon as we solve one resource, as soon as we solve one constraint or one bottleneck, it only allows us to then see what the next bottleneck or constraint's going to be.
Definitely, and I think It's interesting because if I look back at a decade's worth of hard-fought lessons learned, like I'm fundamentally a pretty lazy man. Like I prefer to manage less stuff. To like take advantage of the improvements to do less stuff, but still see the same result or get more out of it. But I kind of feel like we're in this place where technology has never been more powerful. The platforms have never been more powerful. Yet at the same time, the complexity involved in managing them and running them is still shockingly high. And while maybe provisioning is a lot easier, now architecting your app to work in that kind of environment is even more complicated. When in reality, part of me wonders how many apps out there could actually make a pretty good go of it with a M1 extra large, like buy 5 of them. And then, you know what, you could probably handle a lot of requests per second to manage your small real estate company or something, right?
But that's so antithesis to the IT spirit. The IT spirit, we're kind of like dogs. We do it because we can, and give us a shiny new trinket or something to play with.
Yeah.
We want to do it. Deepak, we'll spend the whole 20 minutes talking about this. Though we got stuff to cover.
Definitely.
So some new announcements coming out of Puppet.
Yeah, for sure. We've got the newest version of Puppet Enterprise is coming out. That's 2019.8. That one is long-term supported release. There's a bunch of good stuff in there. Ranging from like it includes the newest versions of all the underlying open source stuff that we've got. Tons of performance improvements, but probably the biggest things would be number one is more turnkey workflows for, this is very apropos of the previous conversation, more turnkey workflows for things like patch management, which is interesting because again, people have been using Puppet to patch systems forever. Like that's not a novel thing, but now we've started to see more people called upon by their bosses in IT to do more patch management at scale in more heterogeneous environments. And we're starting to see more people start to use Puppet technology that aren't necessarily like the classic DevOps experts. But they're starting to take on more of these roles because that's the way IT is going. So we've gotten a tremendous amount of really strong feedback from customers around, well, we know you can patch systems already, but we would love it if you could make the user experience a little more turnkey for people that don't necessarily, understand all the underpinnings of the software or a DevOps toolchain. People that come maybe from more of a Windows background, but because of COVID and because of, kind of the economic volatility, a lot of IT departments are consolidating teams. So we're encountering more teams where maybe they used to only run Windows desktop IT. Now they have ownership of a huge part of their data center or their cloud deployment or endpoint management, things that they have to patch, and they might be Linux systems. So bridging that gap in a heterogeneous state, but giving them kind of a turnkey workflow has turned out to actually be really important, which is not something I would have expected. But you go where customers tell you that they have their needs.
Absolutely, you gotta you try to lead the market, but you got to lead the market by solving customers' real problems.
Well, that's the thing, and I think the big thing that we heard from them was just more people being asked to manage a wider variety of systems now than they were before. So for all the talk in IT of standardizing everything, and that seems very aspirational still, where the reality of it is, though, is you consolidate, reorg, move stuff around, change what people own. It's messy. So because of that, tools like ours that work in a multi-platform way, I think end up being a lot more valuable to a lot of enterprise IT than the tools that just work for this one kind of niche. It has to be built in this way or just deployed in this one cloud on this one stack, where if you're doing it, fantastic, good on you. But most of us do not have that luxury, right?
Well, no, it's not only a luxury, Deepak. Mm-hmm. At some level, so there used to always be this best of breed versus, one throat to choke kind of thing. But I think at this point, would best practices almost demand that you are not locked into any one platform.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of saying I could only work on AWS or I can only work on Azure. I don't know. Look, there are plenty of companies who are in that boat. right? But
Yeah,
I just
definitely.
don't know if that's where you want to be going forward.
Well, even if I took the example of I just want to run on AWS, the set of services AWS had like 5 years ago, that if you were bleeding edge, that's what you used, and what they have available now, which is like 10x the number of different
Yeah.
services you could use. What does it even mean to say that like you could have two very different apps? Like
Right.
one
Are you
way,
serverless? Are you using
right?
containers or Kubernetes? I mean, are
One
you just
way
on the hype? Yeah.
One way I think about it is, it is, this is a statement I guess I'll make, and you can challenge me if it sounds outlandish, but in 2020, I feel like it's easier to, systems are created more quickly than you can decommission old ones. New ones pop up at a faster rate than old ones go away. So
Yep.
if you do the math and you just put it on a timeline, even if I'm running a company and every single tick on the timeline, I'm picking the most bleeding edge stuff, it's not going to be the same as the stack as it was, 12 months ago. 12 months ago in tech nowadays, that's if you're architecting it a year old, you're yesteryear nonsense, practically, which is ridiculous, but that's what people think. It's the
But
march
that's
of
the world we
progress.
live in. Yeah.
It is.
Well,
So
not only that, I'll put forth the proposition that, we used to have this concept of internet time, right?
yep.
The time crunch of internet time. I think since this whole COVID thing, frankly, we're seeing a greater kind of crunching of time where, things that people were going to do over 2-3 years, they're doing over 2-3 months. And the idea of using something that was designed when we're going to have everyone in the office and not a remote workforce.
Right. Yeah. It's
Right? If
instantly
you're
antiquated.
designing that, you're done, right?
Yeah. Well, it's
So-
so if you think about that timeline, then that means logically, if you do the math, as time goes on, you're going to have a wider variety of different vintages of stuff,
Yeah.
right? That snap to different points on that continuum. And if you have different vintages of stuff, they're going to be architected in different ways with different tech running on different platforms. So if you want a unified way to manage it, you have to end up kind of using tools or trying to think about the problem in a way that thrives in a heterogeneous environment. Because if you can't, well, if you're successful, it's almost inevitable. You're going to end up with a heterogeneous environment. So why fight it? And that's strategically where my brain is at. It's like, well, we should just be building tools that thrive and flourish in that kind of environment, because I feel like that's the inevitable conclusion for any IT department. You're going to have a mix.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So we've got the new release of Puppet. There's been some other recent news. Of course, Abby Kearns joined.
Yeah,
We
so she's
interviewed Abby.
Yeah, so she's my co-CTO. She's currently running product management and sort of acting as chief product officer for all the kind of nearer term product strategy, and she's awesome. So we kind of
We like Abby.
yeah, so we meet in the middle, where I'm tending to focus a little bit more on either the ones and zeros up, just because given my history developing a lot of the stuff itself, and then longer term strategy in terms of like, which way are the trade winds blowing, like what we've been talking about. And it's been great. I think
Well, it's good. It's good to not be an island, right? It's good to have a peer to help with.
that is
I've been
very
there.
true. It's there's a lot going on, I think. So
There
I
certainly
never
is.
turn down great people that want to join the
Well, I mean, so one of my guiding philosophies, I've co-founded a bunch of companies, Deepak, is you never want to be the smartest person at the table. Right?
Yeah,
Surround
that's
yourself
true.
with really smart people. And so that's always a good thing. What other news do we got coming out of out of Puppet?
No, that's
Puppet.
okay.
I said Publix there for a second.
Probably the one of the ones I'm most interested in, because I've been doing a lot of the work on it personally, has been we launched the public beta of a new product called Relay, which happened in the middle of June. And that's like a sort of workflow as code, like workflow automation thing.
Actually,
Based
we did an interview on that.
Yeah, we
Who's
had a
the fellow
conversation
from the
about
open
that.
source?
Yeah,
no,
so
no,
there's a SaaS service for it.
no,
where,
but who on Puppet is working on that with you? He comes from an open source.
Oh,
I interviewed him.
My partner in crime is Alex Bilmes. So he
Yes!
he
Alex.
worked at Reflect.io, and prior to that
Right.
he was at Cloudability. But yeah, so Relay I think is really interesting in that it's
Yep.
a complement to, one of the things we kicked off the interview with was like, we're in this world where people can spin up all this stuff now and it's so easy. So in a real sense, the way I think about it is the surface area of what you want to automate is different now. Whereas maybe before it was a lot of what's inside the operating system, it's users and packages and files and things like that. And for a lot of people in like kind of mainstream IT, that's absolutely number one thing they got to worry about. Everything is very aspirational. But for others that have already been making a move, now the surface area is less about what's inside a VM or what's inside a container, and it's more the platforms themselves or the other services that you're interacting with via APIs. So you kind of have to configure them all still. There's still a configuration surface area. It's just migrated from kind of being inside a box to now it's all these different touch points and how all these different tools and components interrelate because it's so easy to use all these services and just tie them together. You can rent authentication, user management, your database, your monitoring systems, incident response, analytics, all this stuff. So now if you're an ops person, solving even the most basic ops 101 kind of task now involves you touching, in many cases, like 12 different systems in order to make it work over APIs. So I still view it as very much like it's still a automation problem, but I think it's one that's underserved by a lot of ops companies. So the attempt that we're trying to do with Relay is what we're really saying is it's at that level of scale or at that kind of novel architecture, it starts to look more like orchestrating a workflow. Do this over here, then touch this, do these three things in parallel. I hope this all worked, and if it didn't, here's what you do instead. And that's spiritually similar, I would say, to configuration management, but how you execute it is very different. And the kinds of things you talk to are very different in that world, but it feels like a logical extension to me of where Puppet started and where I think we need to be going, which is where the complexity is going to be for an operator that now says, I got paged because 4 new VMs showed up on my network and I don't know what they are. So I have to log into AWS to get inventory. I have to correlate that with my CMDB or my monitoring system. I have to get credentials and access to it to see what's going on. File a ticket with my security team to let them know something fishy is happening. Make some network changes to quarantine them. Go to my log, aggregation system to dump forensic info and maybe send a message to Slack that everything is cool. Like I just made that up, and that's
no. But I told Alex this. To me, this is bringing Puppet automation up the stack.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So it's not just patching or setting up your new instance or immutable infrastructure kind of stuff. It's bringing that same Puppet
sort of
benefit.
DNA,
right, up the stack to the app developer, to the ops team,
Yeah.
and again, circling back to how we opened the interview. This is how the world is changing. This is how IT is changing. This is how the mission is changing.
Absolutely, and
And
I
it's
worry
how
that
Puppet's changing.
Yeah. And the concern I have is that I always want to make sure that ops folks aren't left behind or underserved, right? Because oftentimes, you're the farthest right, on the assembly line. So, in this world where it's so easy to architect and develop and deploy these outlandishly complex systems, I think you could reasonably argue in many cases vastly over complex for the job at hand. But it kind of reminds me of how things were sort of in the early days where ops folks were kind of left holding the bag in a lot of ways, where these platforms are quote unquote standardized, but they're still so complicated and so different.
Absolutely.
And how people use them is totally different that you're calling upon people to manage these things without necessarily, I just worry they're not armed, to the extent that they were
here's
before.
how I always say it, Deepak. What I've been saying is we have put so much emphasis on shifting left
Yep.
that we've isolated those people on the right.
Yeah.
And we need to have a shift left with an eye towards what's going on the right, because if you go back to the original DevOps fundamentals,
Yep.
feedback loops, reiterate feedback. Those feedback loops are out on the right. I'm pointing left. Those feedback loops are out on the right. right?
Yeah.
As time, and then we iterate back to the left. So we can't neglect the right-hand side here in our rush to the left, if you will.
I would agree. There's like this, the day, some people refer to it as day one versus day 2+,
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
And I do think it's an interesting point in the industry where for a lot of people, the answer to day 2 is just, well, if I could just repeat day 1 fast enough, then I'll get to day 2. But in reality, if you're an ops person, like that doesn't solve, that doesn't solve security breaches. That doesn't necessarily deal with like cost management. That doesn't necessarily help you deal with like debugging a system where something weird is happening and where there might be actual data on it that you just can't obliterate and put something new out there. So I think it's powerful that we can respin and reprovision these things really quickly. Like that's good, right? But I don't think it's a substitute for what ops people have been called upon to deal with forever, and they still have to do all of those exact same things now.
Agreed.
It's just they have to do it in this insanely volatile environment where the tech is constantly changing underneath them at a way more rapid pace than it was before, and that's hard, So obviously my bias is I think. Automation has a real role to play, and letting people automate a lot of those things in a way that's easy for more of the masses to do than experts that already work at one of the 6 companies that make a couple of $1 billion a year that
Right.
they've already built all these custom
They got
systems.
this. Exactly.
They already got it. But for everybody else that doesn't, what do you do? And that's why I think it's an underserved market, right? And I'm very interested to see like how we can make people's lives better in that kind of way.
Cool stuff. Deepak, we're over time. I apologize.
No, that's all right.
But
It's easy to
listen,
talk.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's not wait 2 years or whatever to come back, okay? Or a year and a half. Come back and visit us real soon.
Absolutely.
All right, my friend.
Sounds good.
Deepak, say your last name for everyone. I don't want to mangle it again.
No, it's all right. I'm Deepak. Its last name is Giri Dara Gopal. But if you just
Giri Dara Gopal.
Google Deepak at Puppet, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one. So
All righty. Hey, Deepak, be well. Say hello to all our friends at Puppet, and
I will.
We'll talk to you soon.
yeah,
This
you
is
too.
Alan
Be well.
Schimmel.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Thanks, Deepak. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, our next interview today is with my friend Liz Zalman. Liz, of course, is the CEO of Strong DM. And Liz has with us today Ben and James from Mantle, a fintech company. And, Mantle is bringing state-of-the-art big company banking capabilities, offerings to small and medium-sized community banks, credit unions. And they do it by leveraging Strong DM to help them with access and access control, remote, and so forth, access to cloud resources. So it's a great little study, and Elizabeth and Ben will make it happen for us. So here's my interview with Elizabeth Zalman of Strong DM, Ben and James on Mantle.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of TechStrong TV. In this segment, we've got 3 people, as you can see, and let me introduce them to you. I'm going to start with the lady, Liz Zalman of Strong DM. Hey Liz, welcome back.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here.
Okay, and then we've got 2 guys. The guy up in space there is Ben Conant. He's not really up in space. He's in Tenafly, New Jersey. But, hey, you know, with the magic of Zoom, he could be anywhere. Hey, Ben, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And then last but not least, we have James Qualls. James, I didn't even ask you prehand. Where are you from? Where are you coming in from today?
I'm in Harrison, New Jersey.
Okay, so we got a bunch of Northeast. Liz is up in New York, and I probably have the biggest New York accent of all you guys. So there you go. But anyway, so we have not. I don't think we've ever covered Mantle on our show or even in any of our DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal. I don't think we've covered Mantle before. So let's start off with a little bit about who Mantle is, and then as part of that, James and Ben, tell us what your roles are at Mantle.
Sure. So I'll start. I'm Ben Conant. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Mantle. And Mantle is a fintech startup that provides banks and credit unions with the technology they need to meet the demands of modern customers. So you can kind of think of us like Shopify, but instead of helping sort of medium-sized retailers have an online store without an engineering department, we do the same thing for American banks and credit unions. So like there's actually 13,000 financial institutions in America, and 96% of those financial institutions are not Chase or Bank of America or SoFi that pump millions, if not billions of dollars in. And these financial institutions really don't have access to technology vendors that they want to work with or provide them with what they need. So that's why Mantle exists. We are trying to reimagine what it can be to be a small bank, medium-sized bank in America or a credit union by providing technology that meets what they need.
Very cool. James, what's your role at Mantle?
Yeah. So I'm the director of engineering here at Mantle. I'm primarily responsible for infrastructure, site reliability engineering. I have the pleasure of architecting everything that Mantle runs on, and we have the opportunity to run on a very modern cloud infrastructure. So we use Kubernetes. Everything's configuration as code, running as Terraform. We take advantage of as many cloud products as we can.
Excellent. And then Liz, we've had Strong DM before, but for people who may not be familiar, give us the Strong DM story.
The Strong DM story is that the way people manage access to infrastructure has fundamentally changed since cloud. You've got an explosion of servers, database management systems, cloud providers. Kubernetes came into existence, and so doing it by hand or relying only on Active Directory, it doesn't work anymore. And so Strong creates a single control plane for you to both manage and audit the access of anybody who works for you, a contractor, an employee, service account, to any infrastructure that is yours.
Cool. So for purposes of setting up the discussion of how Strong DM works with Mantle, Ben, I'm going to ask you to give us an example of some of this technology and apps that you guys are creating or helping maintain and power for your fintech clients, for your small, medium banks, credit unions, stuff like that.
Yeah, so the first product that we decided to develop for this market of sort of medium-sized banks and credit unions is a way for those banks to have a kind of open an account.bank.com website that was completely white labeled and personalized to their brand, but really felt like signing up for Robinhood or Acorns or one of the sort of big fintechs that have a really slick sign-up flow. Because a lot of these banks, they don't, in order to achieve the kind of deposit growth that they want to achieve, they have to go online, but they're really suffering from not having a website that anyone would want to sign up for a bank account on, right? So that was a very, it was a very specific product, but there's a huge market for it. So we decided to start with that. And then, from a technical perspective, what does that mean? It means for us, we have node microservices running in a Kubernetes cluster. We're also talking to Postgres data stores in GCP, and then we need to control access and have firewalls and UAT environments for the banks to test stuff out. using Cloudflare. So, StrongDM kind of ties into that because as we grew and as we scaled, we needed to manage internal access to different pieces of our infrastructure. And we were actually thinking about, building out our own little app to do this and like have SQL, access provisioning stored up in a database. But then, through looking at vendors and finding StrongDM, it seemed way better to sort of go with a company that was dedicated to providing that.
Very cool. Now, it would seem to me, and I'm not the expert here, you guys are, but Liz, in their setting up this sort of account opening app or online account opening app, that seems like something that StrongDM would definitely be of much help to. No?
I think it was. I remember, James, I think in our first conversation, you had I think the interesting thing about the Mantle team, whatever, it's interesting about all my customers, but Mantle has a very clear point of view on the way that they want to do something in order to honor what their customers need. And so James has always had a very clear point of view of, we need something implemented like this for these business reasons. I've tried on these other solutions. They don't work for reasons X, Y, and Z. And so actually Mantle is one of our most sort of forward-thinking, pushing the boundary customers that exist. I remember, James, when it came to setting up HTTP access for your internal employees and talking about header redaction, and I think it was Vault, the hosting of Vault. Yeah, I was like, all right,
secrets.
Got to upgrade that.
Yeah, no, well, Vault's huge, right? I mean, Vault is a little known power, not little known, but to those in the industry, it's not little known, but outside of it, I mean, Vault may be HashiCorp's biggest, product, and they have some great products. But so James, Elizabeth's kind of throwing you under the bus here a little bit. It all comes to you. So, how did the mission, what else did you look at? What are the kinds of things, right? And how did you come on StrongDM?
Yeah, so I would say that I would say the top 3 resources that we needed to gain access to. One, obviously Vault, which, it's an HTTP based product, but, we could have gone with Cloudflare Access for Vault. We could have gone with, Google's identity aware proxy. But the bottom line is that it's much easier to manage and provision access if the system that you're using is consolidated into one product. And I don't want to have to manage access to these resources across 3 or 4 different products. So we continue to look around, and when we found StrongDM, the first thing that we provisioned access for was databases. That's something that no other product on the market does better than StrongDM. StrongDM covers a number of database protocols. We happen to be obsessed with Postgres, but StrongDM supports things like Cassandra, things like BigQuery. So you're not necessarily limited in terms of protocol. There was an alpha that they were running where we got immediate access to the ability to not only proxy to databases through StrongDM, but also to proxy to HTTP-based workloads. Vault happened to be the use case. And the email that Liz is referring to is when I was talking about the audit logs and StrongDM actually logging the Vault tokens in the early alpha, and I requested that we have some kind of header redaction. And our team took our feedback immediately, and within a very short period of time, they had implemented a fix for that. And to be honest, even in the alpha, the product was very usable. We were able to use it immediately, and no one really knew that we were in an alpha. The product just worked. So essentially, we were able to consolidate access to resources that we had actually been using private tunnel or pry tunnel to run a VPN to those resources. After migrating to StrongDM and after finally providing access to all of our resources, we use Postgres, Kubernetes, Vault, and there are some other internal resources that we provide access to. All through StrongDM, we were finally able to kill that VPN. So we're an entirely identity-aware system at this point, purely because of StrongDM. And then we had an added benefit when COVID hit, we were able to entirely go remote because we didn't have to scale a VPN. And this product is super high performance. We haven't run into any bottlenecks either. So, we've quickly grown over the last 2 years from 11 to almost 50 people now. And we're all of us are presently remote, and all of us are using StrongDM.
Very cool. Very cool. And I don't know the answer to this, and I hate asking questions I don't know the answer to. But is there application to use StrongDM outside of Mantle's own internal workforce for some of these banks, credit unions, small, medium banks and credit unions, because there's all kinds of financial regulations that you got to deal with here from a compliance standpoint and everything else. So do you use StrongDM beyond, the internal Mantle team?
Liz and I have had a conversation about that, about potential applications for StrongDM's technology. I would say that probably Mantle's biggest technical hurdle when we're integrating with a new bank is setting up network connectivity. And traditionally, it's by large, it is usually an IPsec VPN that we're connecting to. And I see a potential application for StrongDM there, although we haven't attempted to see if it would work, or if one of our customers would actually be or find that acceptable.
Ben, I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there is a huge market of banks that, beyond just connecting to Mantle and allowing Mantle to operate with their sort of legacy systems, there is a huge market within banks where they have exactly the same problem, right? Like, people who are analysts at banks need to access lots of different data that's all siloed in different data sources and different sort of network resources. We've heard a lot of our customers really struggling to set up or scale their own VPN solutions. And we've also, worked with them to kind of like try and help mitigate those issues. But I think that StrongDM is definitely a product that banks themselves should consider adopting, right? Because in the same way that it helps Mantle employees have highly compliant and secure and easy to manage access to the resources they need to do their jobs, banks have that problem, but almost way larger than Mantle because they are 500-person organizations or 1,000-person organizations instead of a 50-person, software company.
Yeah, because that was my thought on it too. Is these banks, the kinds of issues you're talking about, James, that you guys are dealing with at Mantle, and why you would use a StrongDM kind of solution. The small banks, community banks, credit unions, they have the same issues, right? And maybe some of them still are, on legacy infrastructure. But if anything, I would imagine this whole COVID thing is accelerating their transformation there as well.
Absolutely. When COVID initially hit, we had several banks, just scrambling to scale their VPN infrastructure. Some people were not actually even able to go beyond a certain point, and they had to reconfigure their entire network topology as everyone was forced to go remote. In terms of how StrongDM can be applied, I think that with COVID being a driving force behind that, I think that there's definitely an opening for banks to start adopting newer technology. And StrongDM is so easy to operate. It's literally a don't even think about it product. When we deploy it, we have the pleasure of deploying it on Kubernetes. So we literally don't even think about it. Scheduling and everything happens automatically. But StrongDM is very well packaged. It's a small binary. You give it a token and you start it on any server you want. Yeah.
You know what, Liz? Sounds to me like James is giving you your new sales channel.
I actually just wrote that down. Kubernetes, we literally don't think about deploying.
Yeah.
No, customers have the best way. Customers are the best from a product marketing perspective because they perceive the industry as they perceive it as a practitioner. And while we're practitioners, we're also vendors, and so their language is always the best, and they always know the right way to do things. I think so. I can actually think of two product changes that James have requested. One was the header redaction involved, but the other thing was when StrongDM had deployed support for Terraform. The very first thing that James asked for was, so it's great that you have a provider, but I need to be able to read in all of my configuration before I go and like add StrongDM to it. So when are you going to support Terraform import? And so it's very similar, right? You have practitioners, you have very forward thinkers who are like, this is the right way to do things, and can you help me align to that?
Excellent. Hey, Ben, I got a question for you. You know what? I love doing interviews with people like James and Elizabeth, and we knock around things like, Kubernetes and Terraform and Istio and maybe Cloudflare and stuff like that. But Ben, you're CTO, co-founder, you're going to talk to these small community banks and credit unions, and even their IT departments. Do they, when you start bandying about stuff like this, and this is, does that resonate with them, or they just say, hey, that's why we have you here. You deal with that stuff. We're not interested in what Kubernetes and StrongDM is.
I think that there's a very real sense in which the banks that are our customers are really purchasing as a service a large part of their company's technology stack, right? So if I'm the CTO or the CIO of a bank, I'm trying to figure out, how do I move to the cloud in a way that is going to make sense, right? And one big way to do that is to simply purchase Mantle, because now your entire account opening stack is actually hosted on GCP, and you get all of the security benefits of that. And in the same way, you want to be very involved with the decisions of like, well, what technology is my vendor actually running, right? So I think that the forward-thinking banks really do take it seriously and ask a lot of questions about our stack. I think maybe more importantly, there is a very intense vendor due diligence process that even the smallest banks in America go through before allowing themselves to work with a technology vendor, right? And so one thing that StrongDM really helps us do is, maintain a state of what we call perpetual compliance, right? So we have an amazing director of security at Mantle, and we undergo SOC 2 audits, PCI audits, and other types of security audits every year. And having the capabilities that StrongDM comes with out of the box allows us to, at a moment's notice, produce the documentation that's required for a SOC 2 audit for a lot of the stuff that we do. And that keeps our customers very happy, because not only are they concerned with, oh, wow, like you guys are on GCP, you're using Kubernetes, you're way ahead of the curve relative to the other vendors that we could go with, but they also like the fact that we sort of breeze through these audits and are able to provide them with answers to the tough vendor due diligence questions that they do ask in the sales process.
Excellent stuff, man. Liz, I'm wondering if what Ben says he's seeing, it kind of is parallel to what you guys see as well, that, especially dealing within the financial industry and fintech, there is sort of a high bar of due diligence in terms of, is StrongDM really secure, compliant, no backdoors, or I'm not creating a bigger problem by trying to solve another problem?
Certainly, I think it's twofold. So companies get to a certain size where, and we've experienced this in fintech, where they've rolled their own for some time, and then it gets to the threshold with respect to security RFIs they need to answer, or they've hit a threshold in terms of employee base where they say, okay, I actually don't want to develop a core competency in identity and access management, and I want to offload that to a service provider, similar to how Mantle sells essentially a hosted web app and flow for credit unions to come into the 21st century. And then certainly as part of any diligence process with us, we get asked, what are your security, what do you attest to? What are the results of your pen tests? We did SOC 2 type 1 when we were 8 people large, because it was such a core part of the sales process. I think customers want to be able to buy something that they have confidence in every aspect, that it provides the services, that it's high availability and doesn't go down, and that it is as secure and people do what they say. So certainly that's been a big part of the software since, 2016.
Wow. It's a while. All right, guys, we're about out of time, but I realized Mantle, for people who want to get more information on a hot fintech startup out of Jersey there, where can they go on the web?
Well, mantle.com, MANTL.com, and you can actually see on James's shirt, it has the correct spelling of our name. But that
nice billboarding, James. Good work.
If we were both wearing that shirt, then it would have been a little bit weird, but I'm glad that it's James and not, both of us.
It wouldn't go on the ISS anyway, so you're dressed appropriately, Ben. We'll let it go.
Mantle.com is a great place. There's also been a number of industry publications about us, talking about how we're helping, in American Banker and others, helping community banks really become fintech companies, which we believe is their future, right? We think that all these fintech companies are trying to become banks. If you look at SoFi or you look at Simple Bank or any of these like up and comers, really you've got these small banks that if they just had a platform to move and really innovate from a technology perspective, they are going to become the fintech service providers of the future.
It's funny, they're just from both sides of the spectrum converging on a common market is what you got there. But Elizabeth, Strong DM for people who may not know, where we go get more information.
StrongDM.com, STRONGDM. Here at StrongDM, the DM stands for Dragon Matrix.
Okay.
Did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it came up at our last onsite. Although I gotta say, everybody wants T-shirts, and I'm like, no T-shirts. I want a trucker hat. But then that would look weird on camera. James's shirt is much more effective on camera. So.
Yeah, no, shirt works, James. Good work. Hey, guys, we're gonna call it a wrap on this segment here for TechStrong TV. James Qualls, Ben Conant. Did I mispronounce it? Yep. Okay. From Mantle, and of course Liz Zalman from Strong DM. Thanks for joining us. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
I've had the privilege in my career to start a few companies, and it's nothing like, birthing a company, if you will. I had the idea around what became Accelerated Strategies for as long as we've been here at MediaOps and DevOps.com. But I couldn't do it myself, and when Mitchell Ashley, my longtime friend, came on board, we started it up, and we were really lucky to be able to draft Sanjeev Sharma in, and Accelerated Strategies has taken off since then. Their new report just came out this week. It's the State of Software Delivery Management. It was commissioned by CloudBees. Mitchell and Sanjeev was the primary author of it, but it represents a lot of research surveys and interviews and analysis. It's a great report. I sat down with Mitchell and Sanjeev to go over it, and it was very rewarding to see the dream of Accelerated Strategies Group become a reality and manifest itself with this report. So here's my interview with Mitchell and Sanjeev.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another session here on TechStrong TV. I'm joined in this session by two of my cohorts as part of the the greater media ops neighborhood, if you will. And that is the two co-founders from Accelerated Strategies Group. My partners, Mitchell Ashley and Sanjeev Sharma. Mitchell, Sanjeev, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks. I'm great to be here.
You'd be on this side of the microphone.
Yeah, you've both been here, but usually on my side of the screen. But we've got you on the other side, so the rabbit has the gun. But anyway, guys, the reason we have you on is we just announced, Accelerated Strategies Group's announced the release of their kind of really groundbreaking, report on the software delivery market. And of course, the report was commissioned by CloudBees, but it really represents a ton of research and analysis. Sanjeev, I know you've done kind of yeoman's work on this with Mitchell's input. First of all, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I've had a chance to go through the report. Not only is it just chock full of great information, I mean, just, graphically, visually, it's stunning. And really nice job there, guys. But let's dive in. So, software delivery management, SDM. What is it? Why should we care? What did you guys find out?
Well, you have a pretty nice definition there in the report, Sanjeev, about and an interesting spelling of it, I guess it is, where you talked about it. Let me see if I can pull that up. Set of aligned processes, practices, and organizational structures that allow teams to have visibility, share information, collaborate better. It's all about getting software out the door. But not just software, it's knowing that you're getting the right software out and being able to expect what software you're going to get out the door. That's really what this report is about, is it's kind of a sense of the industry, people who are creating software, particularly in enterprise organizations, but also product companies of, you can create software, but how are you with the overall process of it, and how well is the business tied into really understanding what software is being delivered for them and when?
Sanjeev, your take on it?
Yeah, I think, I love, stepping away from formal definitions to explain things, right? And let's think of a product company, physical product. Maybe we're making these water bottles or something, right? If we are delivering this and our goal is to capture the market and deliver it, in a profitable manner, we're going to have very good visibility into the entire software delivery process, in the entire product delivery process. And we'll know, how much each component costs. We'll know when we deliver it, where did we add value to the process? Where there were inefficiencies which we can maybe work on improving? If we want to improve it, should we invest to make the process more lean and efficient? So for physical products and in smaller companies, even in the software space, this is a very well understood space. But as we go step back and look at large, especially enterprises, right, which have very complex value streams and supply chains of delivering software with distributed teams, multiple technology stacks, multiple vendors and suppliers, it becomes very opaque. Most companies in their survey found that while we were doing the research, they don't have good visibility into where are those pockets where value is being added, and where are those pockets where we have inefficiencies or value is being subtracted from our value stream. And I think managing that process is still a struggle for a lot of organizations. And that's what software delivery management brings to the table. Formal practices and approaches and strategies to help manage that process better and become lean and efficient.
Fair enough. I got to tell you, let me give you my shimmy take on it. So I've been following this software SDM space since I first heard the term coined probably 2 years ago. year and a half or so ago is I think maybe the first time I heard mention of it. It was 2 years ago. And to me, it's I come to think of it this way. And I use, a factory, an assembly line analogy, where if the software delivery pipeline, life cycle, whatever you want to call it, represents the assembly line, where we have assembly line workers, developers, DevOps, actually, assembling software, right? And if you've ever been to a factory or manufacturing plant, those workers are usually out on the floor, right? But if you look up from the floor, you see offices kind of all around. It's kind of the eye in the sky, and there's offices up there. Some people are physically watching the assembly line. Other people are watching screens showing the metrics, the efficiencies of that assembly line. How many products are being produced? What's the relative quality? What's the bugs or defects or what have you? It's the managing of the business.
Right? So
what
in my
I
mind,
like about that analogy, Alan, is that, thinking about just an assembly line isn't too hard to conceive, but conceiving a whole factory with what it takes to put an aircraft together or an automobile or, washing machines and creating glass product, whatever it might be. It's multiple lines, it's multiple processes. Any one thing can slow things down and actually become the bottleneck, but being able to go pinpoint right to it and what it is and really understand, is that important or not? Or is that going to help us ship or not? That's the hard part, because these applications we're doing are extremely complex. Well, the organizations are complex, for one. So that's going to make doing software very complex.
I mean, you think of a gigafactory or, these giant automated factories of tomorrow that are being built. There are multiple lines ongoing at any one time, and they come in and out of each other, in terms of how they touch. But someone has to sort of instrument this whole thing and manage that whole flow, if you will. And to me, that's what SDM is, right? It's managing. It's not necessarily managing the CI/CD tools that you're using, though there's an element of selection there. It's managing the factory, right? So that the assembly lines we're using, pipelines that we build, flow more smoothly. And to me, right? So the flip side of SDM is I think they call it SDA or something like that, right? Software delivery automation, and you need both of they go together here, but really that's what SDM is. So we've defined it, the three of us, right? We've all defined it in our own words. Let's now talk about the meat of the report. What were some of the findings? I always like to ask people, give me the top 3 things that people need to bite into here.
I think a couple of things which were very revealing, right? One of them some of them are pretty obvious. If you look at it and you look at complexities, if you're dealing with companies delivering software, we see them over and over again. One is, and probably the foremost, is that despite us being 10 years into the DevOps movement, which started off as a movement to break down silos, right? To get DevOps and other stakeholders working together, we still have silos, right? Most organizations we surveyed came back and said, majority of them, that we still have organizational silos, and some of those silos are functional, still, and some of them are organizational, right? Business units not communicating with each other, business units using different technology stacks which don't communicate well with each other, or following different processes. So the number one takeaway, I think, was that those silos exist. And another kind of corroborating area we found was that those silos also exist in management layers, right? Typically, when we think of silos, we think of, business unit A or team A being segregated from team B. We also found in our data, when we sliced it in certain ways, that the visibility of what's going on in the software delivery pipelines from a perspective of managers and executives is different from what practitioners are seeing, which also tells me that not only is flow of data and communication not going well horizontally across silos, right, across the application delivery pipeline, vertically across, multiple application delivery pipelines, but also across the third dimension, which is up and down in organization. Executives don't have visibility into what practitioners are truly doing, and practitioners don't have visibility on how the leadership is making decisions. And I think all of these are creating more, impedance or friction in the organization to be able to move forward effectively.
I think, Alan, to build on what Sanjeev was talking about, and he goes into quite good detail in the report on this. I used to just, as a term, kind of use the term happy ears, that managers, like to hear good news, but not bad news, or their people know to deliver good news, but not bad news. That's part of this silo problem, is free flow of information going up and down the management chain. And we found also that there was a significant difference in the understanding of how things were going, where things were at between senior management and people creating the software. Now, that's an obvious management challenge, but why is that important today? In the era of high-speed transformational software development, businesses are now relying on software for everything, and things have to work well. That has to be fixed. Otherwise, the business is making decisions that are based on entirely inaccurate perceptions of what's happening in creating software.
Geez, I thought you were talking about the U.S. government there for a while, Mitchell.
Well, we could.
No, just kidding. Let's not go there.
We could change track real fast.
Let's not go there.
But you're right. I mean, and again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about definition. Management needs that visibility, that transparency into what's happening on the factory floor to better manage the business, right? And in many times, the business itself may not be building software, in spite of every company being a software company. The business may be, in fact, providing financial services or healthcare or manufacturing a widget or what have you. But the act of building the software that helps that business goes is critical, if not core, to the business success.
Right. I mean, it could be the business which is purely using packaged software. They still got to deliver it. They still got to customize it. They still got to extract value from it, right? And
sure,
whether it is client-facing or internal use, all of that software, if it is not delivered effectively, if it is not lean and efficient, you're losing value, right? And today, the more dependent we become on software, the more value needs to be monitored and maximized. And I think that's where some of the challenges lie. And to kind of counter or clarify on the factory analogy, one of the other findings of the research was the total prevalence of software sprawl. Right? We asked questions around what kind of software are you using, and all of the above seem to be the default answer for most organizations.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, is something you don't see in a factory floor. In a highly integrated factory floor where there are assembly lines, you will not have multiple generations of technologies operating in parallel. If they upgrade a system, they're going to retire the old system. But we as a software industry are great at adopting new technologies, and we absolutely suck at retiring old ones. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, the old ones are where the money is being made. And we adopt new SaaS technologies, new packages, new cutting edge technologies, and we end up creating more islands of data and inability for people to communicate and collaborate across those technological differences, right? And I think that was another major key finding of the research, was that software sprawl is hurting us, right? While there has been a lot of movement towards open source, and we are seeing that in the research, software sprawl is a major issue and a major reason why it is so difficult to manage software delivery.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's not just software sprawl, it's technology sprawl.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I was talking to someone earlier today from, I think it was software.com, and they were talking, they've about 100,000 developers, who are part of the community, let's say. And, one of the commonalities among them is that they're all dealing, we used to talk about hybrid environments. You could be solely on AWS and still be running in 5 different environments.
Yep, right.
Whether it's on containers and Kubernetes and serverless or not containerized, but just hypervisor or what have you, right? And you know, the plethora of platforms, and then you start getting into software on top of it, or maybe the platform is software even, is it creates silos almost by very definition. I guess my question to you guys then, though, is this. So this represents a better way, perhaps, a new way for management at the enterprise level to have visibility, to have transparency, and then, of course, hopefully to act upon what the findings and what they see. How do you change the status quo? How do we get people to stop looking at a single assembly line, or stop looking at that factory view versus from the office up here view?
So,
You
so
go ahead,
before,
Sanjeev. I'm going to give
yeah,
the CIO view, so you go ahead.
yeah, so before we jump into that, right, I want to make one clarification, right? And, that is the use of the word enterprise, right? I think that, this applies to not just enterprises, but all sizes of companies. And our survey actually showed that. In fact, our survey found some very interesting data in that space. We found that the level of maturity and how companies have, been able to do what they need to do to manage software delivery effectively was done better for small companies, and done very well, even, not as well as really small companies, but done well for very large enterprises, I would say 10,000 employees and more. But there was a huge dip in the middle, right? The medium-sized businesses, which probably don't have the ability to invest effectively or hire skill or modernize their technologies, seem to be struggling more than very large companies, which have, from their pockets of innovation, have now broadened out the innovation and modernizing of their application delivery capabilities. So I think I just want to make sure that people who are not working for large enterprises don't tune out at that point, thinking this doesn't apply to them. I think the small and medium businesses, 100 employees to 10,000 employees, in my opinion, are struggling more than the two tails at the other end of the graph.
Yeah, especially the medium-sized business.
Especially the
That was
medium-sized,
really where
right?
the trough was.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
sort of the
when we saw-
anti-Goldilocks there.
Absolutely. Even we looked at something in our survey as open source adoption. They seem to be lagging behind very large enterprises and very small companies in open source adoption. And I think that's symptomatic of their inability to, modernize their software or replace older technologies, or maybe even higher skills. And, next year when we do the survey again, we'll delve deeper into some of these, these questions which we want to dig, put aside some more rocks. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that start somewhere, wherever you are. Understand where you are in your maturity journey, and be honest about it, right? Look at the survey results and say, okay, where do I fit in? When you download the report and look at the results, and it will give you as an organization a very good view into, okay, maybe I'm not as bad, maybe I'm not as good, but where am I? And then set some effective goals to focus on how to get end-to-end visibility into data, how to improve collaboration and communication amongst teams and within teams and across teams. And thirdly, how to be able to properly quantify the impact of a change you make, right? The impact of features you release, or the impact of features which get delayed. How do you quantify that? Because I think that's where measuring value, that's what will help you better judge where to invest and where not to invest. And that's one area where we found a lot of organizations are flying blind, right? Because they don't have that level of visibility into where is value being added and where is value being subtracted in a value stream. I'll love to hear your take on this, Mitch.
Yeah, so if I just kind of take another angle to it, is what this data says to me is, we've gone through generations of IT is strategic, or CIO on the executive team, or CIO's lifespan of a CIO is 6 months, or whatever it is. There's always something, but what it really says to me is that we have to focus on how we manage and develop software, not just getting software out the door. And it sounds simple, but it's extremely complex. What I mean by that is not just IT, but the whole organization, the product people that work side by side, or should be working side by side, and vice versa, with the software teams, wherever they are, inside or outside of IT. And really, we've got to shed this, we work under finance, so we're just a cost center, or we're here just to take orders. I know many organizations have fought and gone through some of those transitions. But what you've got to do much, much deeper than that is really understand how good are we at developing software? How good are we at shipping the right functionality that the business can take advantage of in a new market, deal with in a downturn, be opportunistic with, or take on a competitor, whatever it is. And we got to get rid of all these metrics that are IT metrics. How many releases per hour that we do? Who cares? If it's the wrong stuff, it doesn't matter if we do 1 million an hour versus 1 a week. You'd rather have 1 of the right releases per week than 1 million per hour that are the wrong ones. So I think that's what this says. And hopefully, I think there's some really, really valuable data and kind of point markers of where to help point organizations to try to help start to fine tune this and work on how do we do software delivery management. It's not a panacea. It isn't a cookbook that has all the answers. But I think it gives you a benchmark for any organization to say, yeah, this is us, or no, we're doing pretty well there, but we need to concentrate over here. What does this mean? How do we define that, and how do we make that happen for ourselves? And are we measuring the right things? I think that's ultimately, if you put on your CIO hat, that's bringing the business, the software, the product, ultimately the P&L together with people to make it happen.
Good wrap up there, Mitchell. You know what I realized we didn't tell people, where can they get a copy of this report?
Oh, at your local newsstand? No, I'm just kidding. You can go
Who goes to newsstands anymore?
You can go to the Accelerated Strategies website, which is accelst.com. There's a link there to download it. You can also go to CloudBees, and they have the full report there as well. So you can get that there. And again, like we say, knowledge wants to be free. It's a free report. We don't charge anything. Anybody can get access to it. And we hope it's beneficial. We hope you'll reach out to us and tell us what you think about it, what's been helpful to you, and maybe what wasn't, and what we can do to continue to refine this for all of us, help all of us get better at software.
Absolutely. And this is just, I mean, I know you guys have some other reports that are due to drop imminently. I just feel obligated to mention that while you're on the Accelerated Strategies Group website, if you like this report and you want to see how SDM can perhaps help your organization break down silos, get a better handle and visibility into your software process, I know the Accelerate, you guys offer like a 30-minute free consultation that people can just self-serve on the website.
Right there on the download
schedule.
page. To speak with the author. You can get direct access to Sanjeev or any of our other, but certainly Sanjeev in this case, just by putting your name and contact information there, and we'll be glad to reach out. And you can also subscribe, sign up. We don't spam people with emails, but we will communicate with people when we have new and interesting content. Like you said, we've got a lot of other stuff to drop. There's videos there. So you don't have to read the whole report. You can look at executive summary. You can listen to Sanjeev wax on poetically about what a great report. No, I'm just kidding. Listening to some of the good insights that are in this research. So there's lots of ways to consume it. So just hit the Accelerated Strategies website. You'll scroll down just below the hero, and there'll be a link right there.
Excellent.
Sanjeev, Mitchell, great job on this report. Really interesting, good stuff. Looking forward to more on more reports and more analysis. Keep up the great work at Accelerated Strategies Group.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Sanjeev. Great job on this work.
Thanks, guys. Great to be on here.
We're talking about
All righty. Mitchell Ashley, Sanjeev Sharma, Accelerated Strategies Group here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel, and we're going to be right back with our next guest.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
For our Something Old session today, I went back again to TechStrong Con, and we have Paul Stack from Pulumi. Paul did a really great session there on infrastructure as software and using general programming languages to give you a better choice. As I said in the outside of the show, Pulumi is a company that a lot of people I respect within the industry have a lot of respect for what they're doing, their technology, what their goal is pretty cool. And I if you haven't heard of Pulumi, you're not familiar with them, you should check them out. But certainly listen to what Paul from Pulumi has to show us in this presentation.
So thank you for joining me for my session, which is called Infrastructure as Software. My name is Paul Stack. I work for a company called Pulumi, and we believe we are the next company in the evolution of infrastructure as software, infrastructure as code. We are in the era of cloud transition, as we know, and there are different versions of the cloud transition scale that people are going through. Right now we have version 1, there are people at version 1 who are at the first wave of the transition. They have effectively picked up their private data center and moved to the cloud, and everything is traditional end-tier style architecture. So we have application web servers and we have database servers, and they're probably managed by a configuration management tool like Puppet or Chef or Ansible or something like this. And this it's very effective for them because they've been able to take exactly what they have in their physical data center and move it into the cloud. Then we have people at version 2 of the cloud transition, people who are starting to take advantage of managed services and maybe experiment with containers, and they're in this hybrid zone of private public cloud, but also a bit more interconnected services. And then we have version 3, where we have what's called fully modern infrastructure. So, everything is microservice-based style architecture. It's mostly using containers and probably using a scheduler, maybe taking advantage of some serverless, and definitely taking advantage of some hosted services. Pulumi believe that we enable Cloud v3 by default. And so what we actually allow you to do is be able to take advantage of building these hyper-connected architectures. By enabling operators and developers to use modern languages, like actual programming languages in order to program what they need to do, and be able to create layers of abstraction and APIs across many clouds, which actually allow people to unify their tools within their system. So a very quick recap, just to ensure that we understand the terminology that we're using today. What is infrastructure as code? Infrastructure as code is a way of eliminating manual, error-prone changes. So it's actually automated, being able to bring it into your infrastructure changes in production. You'd be able to gain code reviews and previews of what's actually going to change, and it's automated and repeatable. It actually allows you to create things faster, and it's much more predictable in actually what it's going to change than just changing things in a web console. Pulumi believe that we are actually modern infrastructure as code. So we can create our infrastructure using real languages and layers of abstraction using your tooling, so your IDEs and your testing frameworks. We can deploy them. And we have a CLI that actually allows you to have being able to preview your changes, which integrates into your CI/CD workflows. And then we can actually manage all your code by viewing all the audit changes and all the different environments and policies and controls that come with that. There are sort of layers of how you can build your Pulumi applications. You can build on top of our base providers. So these are actually just layers of abstraction across the individual cloud providers themselves using their SDKs. And we support Azure, AWS, GCP, tools like New Relic, Datadog, Cloudflare. We have native provider for Kubernetes, which allows very in-depth interaction with Kubernetes. Then you can build libraries on top, so container libraries, serverless libraries, and infrastructure libraries. And at Pulumi, we have actually been able to demonstrate that by building a framework called Pulumi Crosswalk. So Pulumi Crosswalk is a guide, a best practice framework to allow you to build infrastructure in Amazon currently, which allows you to do things in a very simple manner, which I can actually demonstrate a little later. We allow you to deploy code from anywhere to anywhere. So we support hooking into GitHub, Atlassian, GitLab, VSTS. You can write your code in JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Go, C#, F#, VB. And we hook into our CI/CD tools, so Jenkins, Circle CI, Travis, JetBrains TeamCity. You can publish your packages to PyPy, NPM, GitHub, and of course you can then deploy your infrastructure to Azure, AWS, Kubernetes, VMware, OpenStack, and DigitalOcean. So we do this because we can actually take advantage of real programming constructs. So right now, we are actually declarative. So even though we're using imperative applications and imperative programming languages, what we actually specify is an end state goal. So it is a declarative state. You actually, what you write as your Pulumi application will be what is deployed by Pulumi to your cloud of choice or your infrastructure of choice. We take advantage of being able to use real programming constructs. So in this case, we can see in the example that it's very easy to embed conditional logic and loops just by the fact that we're actually writing our code in TypeScript rather than actually having to inject it into Pulumi itself. We can have multi-provider workflows where the outputs of one provider is an input to another provider, which allows us to actually be able to create these interconnected services, where in this case, you create an S3 bucket and then you use that S3 bucket as part of your Kubernetes deployment. You can package your code into APIs, internal packages that can be passed around, refactored, versioned correctly, and of course, they can be tested individually so that each team can upgrade as they need to across the environment. One of the strengths that we have is our advanced orchestration. So in this case, you actually see some code that will create 3 replicas of a canary deployment of our application to Kubernetes. After we have deployed that, we then check our Prometheus API using check app metrics in order to understand that the application has been successfully deployed. When we have successfully guaranteed that the deployment has worked as expected, we can then roll out the next 10 replicas of our system. So we're really embedding a canary release workflow as part of our system because we're able to take advantage of any code that has already pre-existed. So in this case, it's actually bringing in a Prometheus package on a Prometheus API, and you're able to write your own code and talk to that. And one of the new things that has actually been added since Pulumi 2.0 is the ability to create test-driven infrastructure. So we know that when we make a request to a cloud provider, once we guarantee that the parameters that we pass to the cloud provider are what they expect, then the cloud provider will act as we need to. We don't need to test that Amazon will spin up EC2 servers on our behalf. What we actually need to do is we need to be able to ensure that the code we write to spin up the EC2 web server is correct. And we can do that in a way that you don't even need credentials in your system. So Pulumi has introduced this idea of a testing superpower in 2.0, where we can mock the responses from the cloud so that we actually intercept the request to the cloud provider. And we don't even need to be able to have credentials on our machine. We can get real unit testing validation, and we can understand in milliseconds if the code that we have written would do what we expect it to do. So let's go and run some demos because it's the easiest way to see Pulumi, and it's the best way to understand what we're trying to do. So I told you that Pulumi is a CLI tool. And even though it's a CLI tool, it has got a lot of built-in hints in order to help us understand what it does. So if I run the command Pulumi to start with, we will see that it says Pulumi, to begin working with Pulumi, run the command, run the Pulumi new command. So it will actually, at this point, tell us that it's going to be able to scaffold an application for us. So we have given some well-known applications that are scaffolded. So AWS, and we can give you examples in C#, Go, JavaScript, Python, and TypeScript. Today, I'm actually going to use AWS TypeScript. It will ask us for a project name, and I will call it Demo 1 TechStrong. It will ask for a description, and then it asks us for a stack. So Pulumi has this idea of stacks built into it. And what this actually means is this is a way of being able to deploy many instances of the same infrastructure segmented from each other. So if we think of a stack being an environment, so you would have a dev stack, a test stack, a staging stack, a production stack, but you can also have developer 1 stack, developer 2 stack, developer 3 stack, and the code can be actually revved and changed in each individual environment without interfering with the other environments and the other stacks in the process. Today, I'm just going to choose the dev stack just to build the demo. And what we can actually do is just hit enter. And then because this is an AWS, it's going to ask us, where do we want to deploy this code into? So today, I'm actually based in Ireland right now. So I'm actually going to choose EU West 1 so that we can understand that it's going to build the infrastructure in EU West 1. So it'll just install some dependencies and it'll take a second. And we have a full application. And if I open my IDE, then we can see exactly what we get as part of a Pulumi application. There we go. So we can see that we have a number of pieces of what it's trying to do. The first thing is we have a git ignore. We have some node modules. We have an index.ts, which we'll come back to, package.json, which actually brings in all the packages that it needs, a pulumi.dev.yaml. So if we think of that as pulumi.stack.yaml, so if you have prod, you'll have .prod, you'll have developer 1, and then you just have the basic Pulumi understanding the application structure. So in this case, we can see that it's a Node.js application, its name, and its description. So let's have a look at index.ts. So it brings in a number of imports. So imports are like the SDKs that we have to write against. So Pulumi will have a number of helpers. AWS will have the actual AWS SDK that we have to write against. And then AWS X, which is crosswalk. And I can show you a demo of that in a second about the types of helpers and patterns that does. We see that we can declare an S3 bucket very simply. But if I have a look for another type of resource, I can say AWS dot. We can see the packages that are available. So IAM, EC2, EKS, ACM, ALBs, all of the different pieces of the cloud. And I can say EC2.instance. And of course, our IDE is immediately telling us the types of things that we need to do. Let's just stick with an S3 bucket right now so that we can actually see what Pulumi is doing as an application. So I use, Pulumi will read your credentials from your environment variables. And just to show you that if I set something in our environment variables, then it would be there. I use an application called mchain to encrypt my environment variables. So if I say mchain Pulumi AWS CI, and I say Pulumi up, then Pulumi will immediately kick into action and start to ask us, it'll be able to inspect what we have locally versus what we actually have in the cloud, and it will give me an output of what it's actually doing. So the first thing it says is it would create a stack. After it creates a stack, it would tell us it needs to create a bucket. We can have a look at the details of the bucket, and we can see something straight away. We can see that the bucket wouldn't be called my bucket. It would be called my bucket with a random string on the end. So in Pulumi, we actually auto name by default. And if we go back to our code, we can see that it's aws.s3bucket.myname. And the reason we auto name is there are a number of actions in the cloud where you can't actually make a replacement using the same name. So an S3 bucket is a perfect example. An EC2 launch configuration would be another example. You actually have to have a uniquely named resource each time. So Pulumi will enforce that by default. We can override that in the arguments because I can say bucket is TechStrong demo. And if I go and Pulumi up again, then we can actually see we've overridden the auto naming, and we can see that the bucket name will actually be specified to be TechStrong demo. It'll just take a second to make the plan. Of course, it's not always an interactive CLI. You can turn off the interactivity and you can run it in a CI mode. But for demo, this is much more effective. We can see that bucket is TechStrong demo, and we can say, yes, let's deploy that. And it will go off and deploy our bucket for us. So Pulumi will now have the state of that bucket. And when I make supplementary changes to the bucket, it will understand that it needs to make the changes to that specific bucket. So let's add some tags, and the tags will be a key value pair, and we can say managed by Pulumi, excuse me, and we can say owner is Paul Stack. And of course, our ID is giving us everything we need right there. And again, if I Pulumi up, it's going to tell us that it only needs to change the tags of the service. And we can see exactly the fact that it's only going to add the tags. And then lastly, we can Pulumi destroy, and it will target the specific destruction for that single bucket and nothing else. And I can guarantee you there are hundreds of buckets in my environment, but because Pulumi has the state, it understands exactly what it has to destroy. So let's come up with a more interesting example. Let's come up with the idea that we have to create some web servers, and we have to create a loop of some web servers. So let's copy some code that I have pre-created, and we can describe what we're doing as we go through. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a GET request to the AWS API to get an AMI ID, and it'll be for an Ubuntu 18.04 AMI. Once we have that, we can then actually create an SSH key pair. This is a test key pair that has only been created for demo purposes, and then we can create a security group. Now, usually in infrastructure as code tools, we would have to take advantage of some JSON-like or DSL-like syntax in order to create a loop. But today, we're actually going to take advantage of real programming constructs in order to do it. So I can say let web servers equals an empty untyped array, and I can say for x, excuse me, let x equals 0. X is less than 5, and I can say x plus plus, and I am immediately inside a programming loop right now. I can say web servers dot push, and we can see we're immediately taking advantage of the programming construct of the array, and we can add into it a new aws.ec2.instance. We need to give the instance a unique name, so we'll say web server dash $x. So we get web server 0, web server 1, web server 2, web server 3, web server 4, and we now need to pass in some arguments. So the first thing we need to do is pass in an AMI, and you can immediately see that I am taking advantage of the autocomplete, but also at the same time, I'm taking advantage of the fact that I'm able to get outputs further up my application to use inside programming inside the Pulumi resources further down. Then I can say key name, and it will be ssh key dot key name. I'm going to take advantage of VPC security groups, which will be an array of open security group.id. And then lastly, I need to give it an instance type. And we actually provide support for instance types to make them less stringy and more strongly typed. So I can say aws.ec2.instance types dot, and we get autocomplete of all the instance types. Let's say T3 small here. And at this point, I now have my programming construct. I can say export constant public IPs equals web servers dot map. And I can have a small lambda, which says x dot public IPs. And it will actually output all of the public IPs. So in a very short period of time, we've been able to build out some real code in order to understand exactly what it's doing. But let's actually refactor this code a little more. So I can actually create a new class called webserver.ts, and we're going to push some of our logic into webserver.ts. And inside webserver.ts, I am going to do the following. Firstly, I will import star as Pulumi from at Pulumi. And then next, I will bring in the AWS library as AWS from at Pulumi AWS. I'm going to export a class. The class will be web server. And inside web server, we will return a VM, which will be at aws.ec2.instance. Our class will have a constructor. The constructor will take a name, which will be of string. It will take an AMI, typo, I apologize. It will take an AMI ID, which will also be of string, and it will take an instance type, which will be aws.ec2.instance type. So immediately we're inside our code, and inside our code, we can actually say this dot VM equals new aws.ec2.instance. And here we will say that the instance name will be the constructor name that we pass in. And we need to set some parameters. So the AMI will be the AMI ID. We will pass in a key name. I can actually go and hide this logic away from the user themselves because they don't need to do this. So the key name will be key name. We can pass in the security group ID, which again will be open security group.id. And then lastly, we want to be able to take the instance name as the parameter, or the instance type, I apologize, as the parameter, and we can actually just allow that to be passed in. So back in our normal code, instead of pushing a new EC2 instance onto the web server, we can say a new web server. And we can immediately see that my code, my IDE has gone and imported the correct class that it actually requires. We're going to give it a specific name. So again, web server $0 or $X, I apologize. We need to pass in the AMI, Ubuntu AMI .id. And then lastly, we want to pass in aws.ec2.instance types .t3 small. Now, at this point, I apologize, that is not a string. That should be Pulumi .input of string, because it is actually being passed as another variable from elsewhere. But we can immediately see, because I've refactored my code, that our lambda is no longer correct. because it doesn't exist in the property of web server. Web server exposes a VM, so we can say VM.publicIP, and very easily we've been able to refactor our code and actually hide a layer of abstraction away from individual developers that don't need to care about the individual development. So of course we can run that Pulumi up, but it's not really going to give us anything interesting rather than what we saw before. But now let's take advantage of having a look at what Crosswalk gives us. So Crosswalk, I told you, is the ability to create layers of abstraction or predefined layers of abstraction in our infrastructure so that we can take advantage of well-known patterns and practices. For example, let's say we want to create a VPC setup in Amazon. So if you don't know Amazon, just to give you a quick recap, a VPC setup would be the VPC resource itself, a number of subnets. It would have route tables, route table associations. It would have an internet gateway. It would have elastic IPs and NAT gateways if you were using private subnets. And to bring all those different pieces of infrastructure in, it would be quite a lot of boilerplate code. So in Pulumi, we can actually say constant VPC equals new AWS x.ec2.vpc, and we can give it a name of demo VPC. And the only thing that we actually have to choose, we don't actually have to choose any individual arguments themselves. And if we go and have a look at what Pulumi is doing right now, what it's doing under the hood is it's creating a number of different resources for us. And I'll describe what they do by default. So it's telling us it needs to recreate the stack because I deleted the stack before. There's the top level AWS X VPC, and we will see all of the individual resources that it's going to create. So the first thing it's going to create is 2 private subnets, 2 public subnets. It's going to create the route tables and the route table associations for those private and public subnets. It's going to create 2 NAT gateways, which will actually allow interaction into our VPC and the elastic IPs that need to go with them. And then it will, of course, create the VPC itself. So in one line of code, it will create 31 resources that we would have had to scaffold by hand. Now, it will choose sensible defaults that go with this, but we can actually override all of those defaults that we need it to just by interacting in a number of different things. So the first thing is we can say is we can give it a CIDR block, and let's say 10.0.0.0/16. We can say enabling DNS support for the VPC, but we can enable classic link as well for the VPC if we really want to. We can actually say, we can wrap this in an async function. So let's say async function main. Let's move this code inside the async function main. And we actually want to load balance or balance our VPC across many availability zones. So we can say const azs equals aws.get availability zones. So it'll get all of the availability zones for the current region that we're actually running in, and we can await that because that we can do this in an asynchronous manner. And then we can actually say that we want to create the number of availability zones for the VPC based on the azs.length, .names.length. So we want to calculate the number of availability zones in our VPC based on the number of availability zones available in our environment. We can also give it some subnets, and our subnets can actually be much more tailored. So let's think of, firstly, let's give it a type of private, and let's give it a name, which will be private demo. And of course, we can even give it a CIDR mask to go with this. And let's say that our private subnets need to be like a 20 CIDR mask. We can then also say that we want it to have public, and we'll call these ones open to the world. And we can say these CIDR masks need to be 24. I'm just choosing values just for the sake of demos here. And then we can actually go back to Pulumi, or CLI, and this time it'll actually give us a number of different outputs. So it'll give us many more resources than 31 because we're doing a number of extra things in here. Again, it's going to just, because it's doing a plan, it has no existing infrastructure. So I need to export the outputs. I apologize. So module.exports equals main. We actually want some level of exports here. I need to return, and I need to say VPC is VPC. There we go. So now we will say no to this one, and we will have a look at what it's going to do again. And we should see a lot more information this time. There we go. So we can actually see this time it's got 44 resources because we have created a lot more public and private subnets because we're actually balancing across the number of availability zones in the region rather than just the defined value that Pulumi would choose for us before. So let's say no to that, and let's go and have a look at another part of the demo. So this time I'm going to show you why we believe Pulumi is extremely good at secret management, because it's actually built into our product by default. So I need to install another one of the Pulumi packages here. It's a package called Pulumi Random, and this is a package specifically for demo purposes, just to show that we can create random strings and random names and all these different pieces, and they bring it in as part of our demo. So let's delete this code, and we can just delete the AWS stuff, and I can say import Pulumi as random from @Pulumi/random. Perfect. So let's pretend that we actually have like some secret strings and some secret data that we want to encrypt as part of an application. So how we would normally do this in any other infrastructure as code tool is you would say, like, let's create a random username. Okay, actually, let's create a random password. My password 1 equals new random.random password. Okay, and it's a demo password. And in the terms of trying to adhere to good security practices, let's make it 30 characters long and includes special characters. Okay, just so that we can understand what it's doing. And then what we can do is we can export my password 1 value equals my password 1. And I know from the API documentation that it stores the result in result. So let's go into Pulumi, and we can say Pulumi up. And here I don't really care about seeing what it's going to do because it's demo purposes. And I can say yes to skip the command prompt, and I can skip a preview because we don't care about the plan that comes out of it. And what it will actually do is it will take an entire resource, it will create a new random password for us, and it will give us the password that's created back to the state, or back to the terminal. We can inspect the Pulumi checkpoint at any time, and if I Pulumi stack export, then we can see that it's actually storing the password in plain state. Now, of course, that's not a great way of working, so Pulumi has provided us a way that we can actually stop this from happening. So if I say my password 2 equals new random password, and it'll be a demo secure password. And again, let's say length is 30, and we can say special is true. But in this case, we can take advantage of the third argument to the constructor, which is called custom resource options. So Pulumi has a number of custom resource options, and we can quickly step into the code because it is code, and we can take advantage of looking in the package. and we can see what they have. So we can specify things like delete before replace, additional secret outputs, which is what we're going to look at, whether you want to import existing infrastructure with like specific cloud IDs or S3 bucket names or different pieces of information. And then also things like what its parent is. You can specify direct dependencies and ensuring that things happen in a specific order, whether you want to protect the resource to make sure that it's not deletable, whether you want to version it, alias it, whether you actually need to like target a specific provider, and then even things like adding custom timeouts and specific transformations. I'm not going to take advantage of any transformations today or aliases, but we actually can take advantage of additional secret outputs. Additional secret outputs will actually access the Pulumi secret engine. So when I ran the command Pulumi new, it created a Pulumi stack for me. But if I actually try and create an individual stack for Pulumi, then it will offer us the ability to create a secret provider as part of our Pulumi application. So we can encrypt secrets using a passphrase. We can encrypt secrets using AWS KMS, Azure Key Vault, GCP KMS, or even HashiCorp Vault, which is one of our options. Today, I'm just going to take advantage of the built-in Pulumi KMS, which actually uses AWS KMS under the hood, but it will be a specific set of encryptions for this project and this stack. So we want to pass result, which is the output from above that we saw that was unencrypted, through the secret engine. And then we can say export const my password to value equals my password to dot result. And if I go back and if I say yes to what's happening, now we will actually see that the second password that has been created will be an encrypted password. And even if we have a look in the state, so Pulumi stack export, we can see that we store an encrypted ciphertext in the state file. So even if your state file is leaked or checked into your source control, which is of course not the best thing to do, but at least we have a layer of abstraction which stops us actually leaking our secrets. So it's a very good thing that you can pass secrets through the secret engine or whatever you deem secrets through the secret engine. And I can take advantage of passing any of the resource outputs of any Pulumi created resource through the secret engine, and it will do it. And of course it's a list, so we can pass multiple things through. So if I say length, and if I say special, and if I go back and again run Pulumi up, then it's just setting some other variables that will store in the state file through the secrets engine. You can see no infrastructure actually changed here. But if we go back to our stack export, we will see that there's a number of other ciphertexts that are actually stored. So it's a good practice to be able to store as many pieces of information as you want. Now, as part of the Pulumi CLI, we can actually set some config values this way as well. So if I Pulumi config set my DB password, and let's say our password is a very secure password 1234 exclamation mark. And we can now see in the Pulumi state file in the dev.yaml that by default, because Pulumi doesn't know that it has to treat it as a secret, it stores it as plain text. If I run the same command with -- secret, then it will instruct Pulumi to use the secrets provider. And if we go back, we can see that it's actually secured it using the same style encryption as the resource outputs that were created. So again, if you check in your YAML file by default, then it's not leaking secrets straight away. It's actually going to create that ability that we can hide some things away from individual users. So we try and be secret by default, and we try and ensure that there are best practices that go with that. So let's say Pulumi destroy yes. and we can destroy those resources because we don't actually need them anymore. So let's go and have a look at the last demo here. The last demo I'm going to show you is how we have been able to create helpers, especially in our TypeScript ecosystem, that make life a little easier when you're creating infrastructure. So again, let's go back and import AWS. And let's say Pulumi AWS. And usually in a live demo, it's a little bit easy because I would offer a prize for anyone who can tell me what the JSON string for an assume role in AWS is. But because of course we're not able to do this in a live demo, we can actually just go and I can give you the answer. So if I say constant role equals new aws.iam.role, and we're going to say my demo role, and then a role needs an assume role policy. Assume role policy is a JSON string that we've probably created hundreds of roles, but we never remember the way the string actually works. But Pulumi has created a helper, which would be called an assume role policy for a principal. The principal takes a service, and the service in this case will be ec2.amazonaws.com. We actually have created a specific assume role policy. So, and this will give us the correct JSON. Now, if I go and have a look at what that does for us, so in 5 lines of code, it's actually going to create the correct JSON string for us. And we should be able to see it when we create the JSON string in the state file, because the Pulumi understands that it needs to convert that to a JSON string to pass to Amazon. And we can have a look at what it's doing under the hood. So it is creating the correct string that goes with it. Now, of course, that's extremely useful, but let's even go a little further than this. So usually in infrastructure management, we have some well-known policies that we need to create. So these are policies that allow us to take advantage of EKS and Amazon, for example. And to create these and attach them to the role, you would normally have to specify individual policy attachments. But because we're in real languages, we can actually say let count equals 0. And we can say for const policy of managed policy ARNs. And we're immediately inside a loop right now. I can say const RPA, which is a role policy attachment, equals new aws.iam.role policy attachment. We need to give it an individual name because, of course, Pulumi needs multiple resources to be individually named in the state file. So I can say my RPA $$ count ++. So we know that we iterate over and each time increment it. And then we can say policy ARN, and the policy ARN would be managed policy ARNs. Excuse me, I take that back. It will be policy. And then lastly, we can say role. And because we're in a typed language, in this case, we're in TypeScript, role would be usually the role policy to be applied to. So it doesn't really help us by understanding if it's the ARN or if it's the ID or the name. But in a typed language, we can actually pass the entire role that we created earlier in our program. And if I go and have a look at what that's going to do, it is going to tell us that it's going to create the role, and then it's going to attach 3 policies to that role after the role has been created because of the relationship between role and role policy. So it will tell us in a second. There we go. My role policy 0, 1, and 2. Now, of course, these strings are painful in order to remember. So again, Pulumi has created helper library. So manage policies dot, and we can actually add any strings that we require. And in this case, let's just choose 2 random ones. And next time we run Pulumi up, it'll tell us that it needs to add 2 more policies into and 2 more role policy attachments to attach 2 new roles to the system. and it will actually give us the output that it needs to create 3 and 4 based on the numbering in the loop. There we go, 3 and 4, and notice that it's a random order that it assigns them because there are no relationships between the role policy attachments themselves, so they can actually all be done asynchronously rather than one at a time. And then the last sort of thing that we can attach to the role itself, or the last sort of area about IAM policy management is specific policies that you can attach to like resources like S3 buckets. We have a well-known policy document format that we have to adhere to. So we've provided you a helper that will allow you to adhere to that. So if I could say const my policy, which is of type aws.iam.policy document, and that is, it'll have a number of things. Firstly, it'll have a version. Now notice my ID is telling me that there are 2 options in the version here right now. So let's take the first one, and that is a valid string. Now, if I took that away and made it 2013, then my ID immediately tells me it's not a correct version because we know that it's specified as part of the policy document. A policy also has a number of statements. So in this case, I'm going to create a SID. So let me just say my SID just for the purposes of what's going on. It has an effect. The effect will be allow or deny. Let's say allow. Then we have a principal. I'm just going to adhere to star for now. Please don't do this in production because your policy document should be much more targeted than just stars. The action would be, let's say, s3.star again. And lastly, the resource itself would be, we'll just say star for now. Now, this is a valid policy that can be applied to any piece of resource that will allow it to talk to S3, for example, but we can very easily change that. But if we have something like not effect, then if somebody spelled that wrong, then our IDE is telling us before we even try to go to Amazon that it's not correct. And we can take that policy and we can say const my bucket equals new aws.s3.bucket. And we can say my demo bucket. And we can say that the policy that we want to apply would be my policy. And no JSON was harmed in the making of this demo because we can actually see that it's going to apply the correct JSON structure to the bucket itself, because we can get it in the Pulumi output of exactly what it's trying to do. Give me it 1 second. There we go. We can have a look at the details and we can actually see that the correct JSON structure is being passed into the bucket because Pulumi understands what it needs to do under the hood. So for us, Pulumi is extremely powerful to do a number of different things, and we can take advantage of a lot of different areas. Pulumi has a lot of customers right now using this and successfully using this in a lot of well-known names. And we're pretty happy with some of the different pieces that we're actually creating. The layers of abstraction you can take advantage of. And for us, we believe it is the easiest way to program the cloud. And thank you very much. A small recap is Pulumi gives you modern infrastructure as code. It uses real languages and the tooling that you already use in order to apply correct programming and engineering practices to your infrastructure. For too many years, infrastructure has been scripted, it's been hacked, and it's been difficult to maintain and difficult to pass amongst teams. We believe that infrastructure is actually real living code, and it should allow developers and operators to work together to build everything that it needs to. And we believe that it allows you to manage complexity because we can target abstractions that allow us to actually take away the choices of public, private, or hybrid clouds that can be taken care of by your infrastructure management teams in your organization. So I thank you for your time. If you have any other questions, you can either tweet me at stack72 or you can get in contact with me at paul@pulumi.com. Thank you so much.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
No problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place, you know?
Wow.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Well, it's that time of the show where we're going to go over what's new in town at the media ops sites. And again, it's just some headlines of some of the articles. Please go check them out. But up on DevOps.com, we have APIs, the secret sauce for low-code platforms. And that is true. You know, you can do a lot with low code, but without the APIs to kind of glue it together into existing functions and other apps, you'd be nowhere. So good article there. IAC and Kubernetes, a natural pairing. Another good one on that. Balancing UX and privacy with IoT. Unfortunately, I think privacy may be losing there. Puppet brings orchestration to IT automation. I'm sorry. This is in line with the interview that we did with Deepak earlier. I think it's the a little deeper dive into that. You check that out if you saw the Deepak interview earlier today. And then a new company launched. Observe IQ launches open source log agent project, and we will be featuring an executive from that company probably in next week's TechStrong TV. Over on Container Journal, we have Fujitsu taps Rancher Labs for Kubernetes expertise. Of course, Rancher was recently announced being acquired by SUSE. And interesting, now we've got Fujitsu in the mix there with them. Aqua Security revamps their cloud-native portfolio. You know, they are one of the leaders in cloud-native security, and interesting to see what the folks at Aqua are doing. Our friends Andy and Ronnie are always on. Maybe we'll have to get them on an interview to find out as well. Also on Container Journal, we have, will DevOps survive the Kubernetes onslaught? I think DevOps swallows Kubernetes like an amoeba and empowers Kubernetes. But hey, that's me. I run DevOps.com. Security Boulevard, security guidelines for contact tracing apps. Like I thought there was security guidelines for contact tracing apps. And then big data and the importance of data integrity. CBP scandal buying license plate scams. Sorry, that's not a good thing to be hearing about. And then the value of cybersecurity ratings for CFOs. So maybe make a nice show one day. I have my own views on that, but I'm going to read the article, find out. I'm not going to say anything more about it. But that is the news headlines around town at the Media Ops site, Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, Container Journal. Go check them out. But for now, let's head things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, and Charlene has Fleming Shai, CTO, Barracuda Networks, on today's show. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I am here now with Fleming Shai, who is the CTO at Barracuda Networks. Hey, Fleming, thank you so much for taking some time and talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be able to join you, and thank you for inviting me.
All right, great. Well, I know that Barracuda is very much involved in the cybersecurity space, and I'm really interested in hearing how you guys have seen the cybersecurity threat landscape changing as more organizations are kind of grappling with the fact that the majority, if not all of the workforce, is now working remotely, and it's kind of upended corporate cybersecurity as we know it. So can you tell me a little bit about what you guys are seeing out there right now?
Absolutely. We actually been following this pandemic through the lens of cybersecurity preparedness, as well as how we're responding to it. So generally, we have seen a highly increased number of threats, especially related to COVID-19 topics, right? Let it be vaccines, let it be initially WHO impersonation was about donations, and obviously information, communication, all those things were very much tailored to get people to open documents. For example, we have seen impersonation of WHO with a vaccine solution, asking people to open it. And we also, and this type of attacks usually comes with attachment that eventually becomes a Trojan on your system. Mm-hmm. And this particular attack that I reviewed in April actually turns into a password stealer. So it will actually hit your browser caches, looking for all the passwords you saved in your browser, and find ways to open it and steal your credentials, right? So something that dangerous, but starting with the very, very, I would say, up to current kind of news related to the pandemic. So people obviously will fall for it. We also have seen attacks on logistics as well as healthcare organizations. Logistics is in, shipments of goods, PPEs or I would say all the equipment that's necessary for fighting pandemic. In the beginning, also related to oxygen, ventilators, things like that, right? So attackers are obviously following the news, trending their attacks and preparing the weapons to be much more penetrable. And also, even at times, they mentioned they will not hurt the medical field, but they obviously don't keep their promise. They will just keep hitting it. And we have seen attacks in Canada, with the email attachment that says, "Hey, this is the list of employees in this health organization, this health related organization, healthcare related organization that people are infected." So obviously you will want to open who amongst my colleagues are actually suffering from this. So those type of attacks are prevalent and dangerous. Of course, email is always the first sort of the threat vector or the attack surface the bad guys go after. At the same time, we have seen, but emails don't really get delivered through one bad guy's computer or a cluster that he runs, right? So a lot of it actually attributes to botnets. So we also have seen compute resources, especially in your cloud infrastructure, getting taken over by botnets. And these botnets are designed to actually mount additional attacks. And because they're the bad guys are utilizing reputable environments or reputable brands or their environments, it's easier for them to actually be deceptive and be evasive. Think of it this way: if you have public cloud environment that you have lots of compute resources and assets, those assets can be stolen, and they don't have to really hurt you. What they will do is they will use your assets to attack others, right? Mm-hmm. Therefore, damaging your brand, damaging your service to legitimate customers. So generally speaking, I think the overall cybersecurity world is getting a lot more active, I will say. And that activity really comes from, the massive adoption of public cloud and also people working from home. So more things will be discussed over email, less of a chance to actually meet in person, right? And if you think about it, if you have people working from home, their home networks suddenly become part of your work network. So how do you have secure connectivity and have a true zero trust kind of policy to make sure users are securely interacting with each other within your organization? So it is a huge topic. It does feel like it has put the pressure on the cybersecurity vendors to make sure the solutions are adequate for this new normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've been hearing a lot about the ways that hackers have been infiltrating corporate networks via the home networks with everybody working from home, and the phishing scams that are associated with it. And I'm wondering if this is all maybe starting to sink in with employees, if maybe they're being a little bit more cybersecurity aware. I know early days we were saying that that cybersecurity from the employee perspective had kind of fallen by the wayside because new environment, new ways of working, they just weren't as aware or cognizant, or just maybe they just weren't paying attention as much. So do you think that's changing? Do you think that now they're recognizing that the threats are very real in this new environment and they need to be paying closer attention?
I think so. I definitely think so. The partial reason for that is that in the past, when we go to work, we're driving to work, there's a perimeter. Work environment has a network security and many levels of security around cyber, right? So you enter a bubble, basically. Right. Now that bubble is being bursted. Like everyone has their own bubble every day, and you have to share the same network. You may have an IoT device that could be very innocent, could be controlling your electric grid, or maybe your switching, or your maybe even just cameras or smart speakers. All these IoTs are designed to be relatively consumer grade, right? So the sophisticated attacks can actually potentially get through those. At the same time, you're using your own device. A lot of the folks who use their own device to do their work, and how close, it's kind of like the pandemic itself, right? So if you get infected on your personal account, email account somewhere, or maybe in your social media exposure, that particular infection can jump over to your work network, right? Because you might have your file share on the same system. So really, it's true. People are getting more aware now. Everything's done digitally. We have to really be cognizant about the type of attacks that's coming towards all the employees, and also be a lot more aware. Like there are so many different attacks. For example, brand hijacking, or impersonation, or account takeover. If you have a weak password, the bad guy can actually get into your account, your email account, and set a routing rule. So all your conversation can be stolen, right? So all those things are things that folks need to pay more attention to. And I think it's people are starting to understand. It's also ransomware is another example that basically got so, I would say that the ransom amount is really scary now, right? So it used to be a few $100s, or maybe in crypto coin in the crypto locker days, back in the days. Right. But now it's into the millions, right? So people might lock up your file, but beyond just locking up your file, they even hold the data hostage. They can say, hey, if you don't pay the ransom second time, I'm going to release all your private data for your customers, or your customer data. So generally, the attacks are more sophisticated, many angles, and I think we are becoming more aware. We're building that immune system to actually fight these. But still, you need a lot of tools, because the amount of data you see every day, it's just too much to handle as a human being. Yeah.
Well, I think also we've seen. I will say that a lot of the home networks, that the networking providers, say the cable companies of the world that are offering and providing home internet access to just about everybody. I've actually seen them kind of step up during the pandemic and beef up their bandwidth so that folks are able to work somewhat productively during this time. But do you think that they're going to kind of shall we say, strengthen the security of their networks, also kind of bolster them to the point where maybe they're more like a corporate security network, or a corporate network that's a lot more locked down and a lot more just secure than kind of a flimsy home network?
Yeah, I think that's one angle to look at is basically continue to improve the performance and security of home networks. So you can actually have some level of guarantee or some kind of sensory or alerts, to make sure things, when they happen, you can actually jump in and stop the attack. But more importantly, actually, is that people are thinking about what is the true zero trust kind of a security policy. What that means is conditional, based on your system's behavior, your identity, authenticity, and also your network environment. Then the systems, we always call it microsegmentation, which is one more granular than network segmentation, because network segmentation is basically networks that are not able to talk to each other, right? But microsegmentation gets into the workloads, maybe access a certain part of the application. This is why I think SaaS is a major key component of this whole thing, because everything we do is SaaS. Let it be Office 365, or let it be Salesforce for sales folks, or even using GitHub, right? For getting your code software, actually development cycles in the right place, and getting Jira and all those things working right. So because of SaaS, you are now able to provide more, I would say, granular control on the applications. So regardless how unknown or unprepared the network is, you can always prepare that access point to the actual application. So along with that, I think in the future we'll have better performance at home networks, besides for streaming movies and stuff. For work it's great, for Zoom sessions and for other sessions. But also it's important to think about, with that newfound performance, how do you secure access to every application your users are able to get to for doing their job? So I think that's one key area. So you're going to see probably more endpoint solutions that basically goes way beyond antivirus, but it's more about access control and more about who has access to this particular app and what kind of functions within the app that user have access to. And if there is a malicious kind of activity, the system or the platform will automatically inform your basically security professionals in the organization. At the same time, they can also automatically reduce the risk by basically blocking your access for that time being. So zero trust is really getting a lot more attention these days.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense. If an employee is not behind that corporate firewall, that's zero trust. At the very least, offers a level of protection that maybe just a home security system might not. So,
right.
But at the same time, though, so many so many folks have IoT devices, and you mentioned the smart speakers and smart televisions and such. Do you think that IoT vendors are also going to really put a greater emphasis on security, recognizing that more and more they're being viewed as a potential security threat?
I think that progress is slow. The reason I say that is because about a year and a half ago, we did a blog post, a threat spotlight on a particular situation where it's a camera, and basically we're able to see what's behind the camera. We were able to get into the camera. From the camera, we were basically obviously we stopped ourselves from getting further, but we were very close to really be able to reach the server side, or maybe the SaaS component of that camera company. So imagine that. And year and a half later, we still see the same company, same product still having the same issue, right? The reason I believe that's the case is because a lot of these IoT devices are inexpensive. They're designed to be consumer grade. Who is going to hack into someone's house, so access the refrigerator before COVID, pre-COVID. Now there's a lot more reason to get into people's home networks, because now it could move laterally if it's not done correctly. So generally, that's why certain connectivity protocols are not prepared for this. Barracuda obviously will have a solution that is secure connectivity, so way more security on VPN than anyone else. but the whole zero trust thing comes into play. But at the same time, these vendors are not prepared to build things that is really like, corporate quality, right? Certified for corporate use, certified for company business use, but it's used for home. Now, I'm a little worried because these devices are little windows, little holes in the wall. If you think of it,
right?
People
Yeah,
can come through.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we'll definitely see some movement in the IoT space as time goes on, and the pandemic, rages on without stopping. And even if the workforce continues to work from home at least part of the time, I think we'll definitely see some movement in the area. But to your point, there's less attention being paid to IoT security than perhaps should be. So maybe we'll see that change, hopefully.
Definitely.
So-
There's many ways to do that, and I believe the awareness is the first thing we need to drive. And amongst all the colleagues, making sure folks are paying attention to those things. So I think the future is going to be very interesting. So hopefully we can cover more.
Hopefully it'll be a good interesting and not so much a bad interesting. But
that's right. I think what I think is, I always joke around, like enter the matrix. If you like the trilogy, I love the trilogy. The whole thing is about how you interact and how do you actually build programs. But I believe we're kind of like in the matrix in the sense where things, there are loopholes, there are viruses, there are things. We have to pay attention to everything we do. And it's affecting us. Pandemic's affecting us. If you stop the shipment of personal protective gear, you're gonna affect some people's lives, right? So generally, it's kind of, that is really where it becomes really kind of scary. But everything you can do to make sure your workforce is working from home safely, do it the right way. I think maybe we can cover some news stories in the future about, now that pandemic taught us these lessons, and we have gotten better, right?
Right. Well, definitely, if nothing else, I think a lot of companies will view this as a learning experience as much as anything else. So, Fleming, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Great information. And I'm sure we'll be having another conversation in the future, maybe about IoT security, maybe about the lessons learned from this pandemic.
Absolutely.
So, all right, great. Well, it was great to talk to you. Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. You have a good one. Stay safe.
You too. All right. Okay, everybody, please stay safe and stay tuned for more TechStrong TV, because we've got lots more coming up.